Get started. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second of our Sherlock Holmes author panels this evening. And earlier on, we heard from Alistair, Martin, Orlando, Richard, Susan, and Tom. And this time around, it is Alexandra, two Davids, a Gretchen, a Steve, and a Wendy, representing the USA, Canada, and Australia. A little introduction to MX. My name is Steve Emmets. I'm the founder of MX Publishing. We've been around since 2006, and we're the largest Sherlock Holmes publisher in the world. Pretty much any which way you would like to measure that, whether it's by the number of authors, 120 plus, or titles. I think we're probably over 500 now, but we usually say 400 plus. About 2 million books in various formats with print and ebook and various other bits and pieces in the last 15 years around the world. We're what's called an ethical business, or a not-for-profit, or a social enterprise. We support three major causes around the world. The first one is Stepping Stone School, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. Happy Life Children's Home in Kenya, and the United Nations World Food Programme. That picture there is my lovely wife Sharon, with some of the kids at Happy Life in Kenya. We will be visiting there in December again this year. So COVID stopped us visiting last year, but for the last 10 years, we've been spending Christmas and New Year with the kids. So we fly out again for a couple of weeks at the end of December. Undershore is the new name for Stepping Stone School. So it's reverted back to its original name. And it's a school for children with learning disabilities, and we've been working with them since 2009. And I was named a patron of the school in 2016. We've raised over $85,000 for the school. I think that's getting close to 95,000 now, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. We do a lot of events and awareness with the school, and we've had some fantastic events down at Undershore as well. And that's a picture of the school there on the right-hand side. You can see Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's original home restored back to its former glory on the left-hand side there, and on the right-hand side is the new building that houses a lot of the therapy units for the kids. One of our biggest projects is the MX Book of New Sherlock Holmes Stories. We're delighted to have David on our panel this evening. More than 750 stories, 30 volumes, 3 of which are coming out this month in November in the last 6 years. I can't believe we started with the idea of just doing one volume of 30 stories, and it's mushroomed and gone on from strength to strength. And as we mentioned before, it's raised a huge amount of money for Undershore School, and to keep the legacy of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle going at the school and at the building. We have a number of our novels are award-winning, including the first one to win a major award, which is Richard Ryan. So he was on our earlier panel tonight with the Vatican cameos. And we often get endorsements from New York Times bestsellers. And here's David's recent book, The Eye of Hecker. As you can see, Lee Child there with a great endorsement. Lee's been a great supporter for MX, including taking part in the MX book. We've also have some amazing graphic novels, and probably the king of the graphic novel in terms of Sherlock Holmes is Petr Kopl, who writes in his traditional mother tongue of the Czech language. And you can see his amazing art here. So we've converted 4 of his books into the English language, and now into some other languages as well. The first one being Scandal, being translated into Spanish. On our earlier panel was Alistair Duncan. As he said, it's all down to him, and it's all his fault that we're all here. He was the first MX author that we published with Sherlock Holmes related non-fiction. So he has written 3 biographies of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, including the Norwood Author, which won the Sherlock Holmes Book of the Year award from the Sherlock Holmes Society of London back in 2011. This year this evening on the panel, on the second panel, we're delighted to have David McGregor. We really have very, very high hopes for this incredible 2-volume opus, Hero with 1,000 Faces, and we'll be asking David about that on the panel. It's been so well received that we got permission from the BBC to use Benedict Cumberbatch's photo on the cover of the second edition, which covers the later adaptations, and there's been a number of major endorsements from leading Sherlockians. So we'll come back to that one a little bit later. We've done some performance biographies over the years. We did 3 for Benedict. He's very prolific with his performances on stage and screen. And last year, we published the Jeremy Brett biography, including Jeremy Brett playing a part, and also the shortened version, Jeremy Brett is Sherlock Holmes, which was our best-selling title of 2020. Audio is big. Over 250 of our titles have now moved into audio. And just a quick mention for this one. This is a bit different for us, and a real stretch of our capabilities as well as a publisher. Quite incredible book called The Beasts of London, which comes out this month. It's our first exploration into what's called a light manga style novel with incredible artwork, really focused on the East. And we have high hopes for China and Japan on this one. Janina Woods with a very fantasy version of Holmes. Going back to the more traditional, we've been working with the Italian large publisher Mondadori for the last 7 years. They're the biggest publisher there, and we have more than 40 of our titles have sold out through them, including some people on the panel tonight. We have another dozen or so that are going out with Mondadori in the next 2 years as well. We also been feeding into a very interesting subscription style publication called Dear Holmes. This comes out every month or so, and this enables subscribers to take the role of Holmes and try and solve mysteries ahead of the great detective. We've been doing that for 3 years now, and we've had about 30 cases there. Finally, a quick mention for the Art of Sherlock Holmes, really fascinating project created and curated by Phil Growick. So this is creating pieces of art from Sherlock Holmes stories, and we've done 55 pieces of art from that. And that's enough for an introduction. So now we're going to go on to our panel, if I can get the technology to work, and see if I can stop sharing my screen. And we can jump straight into the panel. So we're going to go around the table and ask each of the members of the panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their Sherlockian writing. And if we start in the top left-hand corner, it happens to be David McGregor. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. I watched part of the previous panel, and that was a disreputable crew, but they seemed to know what they were talking about. I just wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alley. As Steve said, I wrote a nonfiction book, Sherlock Holmes, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. That's basically my attempt. When the Benedict Cumberbatch series began, people went nuts over it. The updating of the stories, Cumberbatch's cheekbones, the cinematography, the quality of the production, Benedict Cumberbatch's cheekbones. There was a lot of excitement, and a lot of people were like, this is the guy, this is the guy, this is the definitive Sherlock Holmes. And the thing is, people said the same thing about Jeremy Brett in 1984. They said the same thing about Basil Rathbone in 1939, and they said the same thing about William Gillette in 1899. So there's like these 4 definitive Sherlock Holmeses that aren't remotely similar to each other. So I sat down to try to explain to myself how that could be, like how the character has evolved along with culture and society, kind of side by side, and just took a look at the the film, the TV, the various representations of the character, and just try to make sense of it all. And yeah, it took me 2 volumes to do that. Luckily, what COVID has taught me is that I'm really excellent at social isolating, kind of a savant at avoiding other human beings, or maybe the reverse is true. Maybe they're good at avoiding me. So I was able to finish these books. MX Publishing was kind enough to publish them. And I write plays, and I'd written a trilogy of Sherlock Holmes plays, and I decided to turn those into novels, which also have been published by MX Publishing. And coincidentally enough, I have them at my elbow. The 3 novels are Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Elusive Ear, That's what, Vincent van Gogh loses his ear. Who's going to help you find it? Sherlock Holmes. Secondly, Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Fallen Souffle, featuring the first Uber chef, Auguste Escoffier, also a criminal, and I'm not making that up. And lastly, Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Ghost Machine, featuring, as you can see, Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison coming to Sherlock Holmes because their newest, greatest, most dangerous inventions have been stolen. So I've written Sherlock Holmes fiction and nonfiction.
Fantastic. And your one of your plays is actually running in a theatre in Toledo at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I went there. It opened on Friday. I only live like an hour north of Toledo, Michigan. I live near Detroit, Toledo, Ohio, sorry. I live in Detroit. I teach at a university in Detroit. So yeah, I went down, I checked it out. I did an audience talk back. That's always festive. And the next, my next play is opening up next April at the, there's a theater in Michigan called the Purple Rose Theater that was founded by the actor Jeff Daniels about 30 years ago. And it's great. It's a terrific place. And that's where I'm a resident artist and they premiere most of my work. So yeah, anybody, if you guys want to go to Toledo, not only is there a Sherlock Holmes play running, but you can go to Tony Paco's, the greatest Hungarian restaurant in America, which I highly recommend.
Well, I'm definitely going to check that out. Being of Hungarian ancestry myself, and Hungarian being my first language, I will go and test out that Hungarian cuisine. Next up is Alexandra. This is just by luck. I'm not engineering the non-fiction writers first and then into the fiction, but from Canada.
Yes, I'm from Canada. I'm an author of 9 books, and one of them last year, I had 4 books come out last year, and one was my labor of love. It was about the representation of Sherlock Holmes in the theater pre-William Gillette. He's the first sanctioned Sherlock Holmes, but I have an absolute love of Holmes and I have an absolute love of theater. And one of my favorite theaters is the Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is not, it's a little drive for me, and I love the theater. And what inspired me to write the book was my mother and I, we were both diagnosed with cancer in 2018 at this 3 weeks apart. We're both fine now. But one of the things we went to see was the Hound of the Baskervilles at the Shaw. She had her chemo bag and I had major surgery, but we wouldn't miss it for anything. And I realized how much Sherlock Holmes is an emotional character for people, how much it meant to me, and how much I love theater, how much I love Sherlock Holmes. So I decided I wanted to write a book, and I was very fortunate that MX Publishing gave me the opportunity to publish my 2 great loves, because Sherlock is one of those characters you just want to know in person, and theater is, you're up there, you're right there, right looking at the character. So this was something I wanted to just look into, because so many different types of Sherlock Holmes presentations, so many, some take place in the past, present, some are musicals, and yet I don't think there is a time in the modern times where there isn't some sort of Sherlock Holmes play going on in the present. So I wanted to explore that.
That's fantastic. I had the delight to go to Sherlock Holmes Dinner Theatre in London a couple of weeks ago with several of our authors, Alistair Duncan, Orlando Pearson and Tony Reynolds, and we saw Hound of the Baskervilles spread across 3 stages. It was an absolute hoot. It was a lot of fun. Wendy, I've classified you as in the fiction category here, but you're sort of halfway between the 2, really, aren't you, with Mrs Hudson's Kitchen?
Yeah, it's Mrs Hudson's Kitchen. It's like being a fly on the wall in 221B Baker Street, but you really get a sense of what's going on around Holmes and Watson and what life is like, and what Mrs. Hudson has to put up with sometimes with the 2 of them. But it was a great fun to write the columns. There was a series of 20 columns over a period of 5 years in Canadian Holmes. And there's also recipes that link into each one of the stories. So that was great fun. And right now I've contributed a number of essays to books and edited and reviewed several. And I'm currently writing An Evening with Rathbone and Bruce, 14 films, facts, and food. And it features exclusive quotes directly from the unpublished autobiography of Nigel Bruce and actual recipes from Basil and Ouida Rathbone. So that's going to be coming out. I'm also sketching out a monograph, and spoke to David Markham several years ago about writing a pastiche. And I said, how do I do it? He said, you sit down, you open a Word document and fly by the seat of your pants. So that's basically what I'm trying to do, David.
Good.
So thanks.
Fantastic. So David, you must have flown by your seat of your pants 88 times now, because I saw a post earlier today that you've just completed your 88th pastiche.
Yeah, it's one of the ones I'm writing for next spring's MX anthologies. So, so I guess I'll talk about me for a little bit now. As he said, David Markham. I'm a civil engineer living in East Tennessee, which is the part of the state that's right near the Great Smoky Mountains. I have been a Sherlockian since the mid 1970s when I was a kid, and I found pastiches before I had even read all of the canon with Nicholas Meyer's first two books. So to me, the interest in extra cases beyond the 60 in the canon, it's just always been natural that there would be more than just 60 that we were limited to. I'd always read and collected Holmes. He ended up kind of being my favorite character as I grew up and into adulthood. And in 2008, I was laid off from an engineering job. And after reading so many and being interested in writing for so long when I was younger, I finally sat down and decided to see if I could write some. Excuse me. I had 9 that I wrote that summer. And essentially I did nothing with them for several years. I just kind of was happy that I'd written them and put them on my shelf with the other books by other people. But gradually I got the desire to see them published. So they were published in a book called The Papers of Sherlock Holmes, initially by a small Canadian publisher. But then I heard about MX. I started seeing all those books for sale. So I got in touch with Steve, and the book was republished with MX, and it had a much wider reach. It was able to actually be purchased through Amazon and all the different sites around the world. Not long after that, I wrote a Holmes novel, and I was able to go to London for the first time and meet Steve. And it was just a lot of fun. But in 2015, I literally woke up from a dream where I had edited a book. So I looked around to see if there were any authors that I could get in touch with that would maybe write a story for this book. And I talked to Steve, and he was interested. And we talked about if we did it, that the royalties would go to support the Stepping Stone School at Undershaw. What we actually thought was maybe it would be a book of a dozen, or if we were lucky, 24 stories. But the more people heard about it that year, as it was being prepared, the more people wanted to participate. So it ended up growing from 1 volume to 2 volumes to 3 volumes, over 60 stories that were published that fall. And we really thought it was going to just be a one-time thing. But after it had been published for about 2 weeks, people started emailing me and saying, that's great. How can we be in the next one? And I hadn't really thought about a next one, but it didn't take long to decide that would be a good thing. So it became a recurring series. It was going to be once per year, but we were getting so many stories that it turned into 2 times per year in the spring and the fall. And as time went on, the spring volumes grew from 2 to 3 volumes at a time. So we're doing about 6 books a year now. It's up to about 750 stories. The 28, 29, and 30 are coming out in just a few weeks, and I'm already getting stories for for the spring 2022 books. That experience led me to be able to edit other books for the Belanger brothers and Belanger books. So, and a lot of times it's the same authors that write for both books. Like Steve here has written a lot for both books, and he'll talk in a minute, I'm sure, about that. But it just keeps going on, and it's a whole lot of fun. And I've gotten to meet either in person or electronically just a ton of great people and Sherlockians that I wouldn't have gotten to meet otherwise. It's really let me play in the Sherlockian world in a way that I might have missed if I hadn't had that dream that night of editing a book. So in the meantime, as Steve mentioned, I've written now 88 pastiches of my own, and just going to keep on going. Like, that's it.
I think we definitely have to get you talking to the Guinness World of Records, because I don't think anybody else has written more Holmes pastiches, and certainly nobody has edited more than you have, David. I think the only thing that concerns me about the MX Book of New Sherlock Holmes stories is that apparently your shelf is now no longer wide enough for it. So I saw a picture of the latest 3 volumes, and you're having to stack them on top. You haven't got a shelf wide enough.
Yeah, I've got probably about 4,000 Sherlock Holmes books that I've collected since I was 10 years old. And when we moved to this house 25 something years ago, we built a giant section of shelves in our living room. In a way, it kind of ruined our living room because the whole wall is bookshelves, but they're fixed at a certain width. And yeah, now the MX anthology has exceeded that width. So it's going to have to wrap around somewhere.
Now we just have to fill up 2 shelves rather than just the one shelf.
Yeah.
Gretchen.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your fantastic novels.
First, I want to say, Wendy, you have already written a pastiche, one of the greatest characterizations of Mrs. Hudson that exists on the planet, and I think is the foremost Mrs. Hudson novel. So you've done it already.
Thank you, Gretchen.
And also, I'm sorry, Steve, but I have an announcement to make. Last night, I was invited to join the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes Society, and I am flying. I'm flying.
Oh.
The main reason I'm flying is because they're wonderful and I've always wanted to be part of them, but also because when I was 6 months into my first book, These Scattered Houses, I drove up to New York, which is where they are, and went to an informal meeting and met a whole bunch of wonderful people, and also was told by another writer at that meeting, because at the time I was going around saying, what about a publisher? What about a publisher? Can you recommend one? And this person said, your publisher is MX. And about a year later, or a year and a half later, that became true. And it's amazing to me, the serendipity and the connectedness of all of this. So anyway, I met Sherlock Holmes when I was 6 years old, on TV. I'll remember his name in a minute. And the actor that played him, and like David, I had no idea that that there was pastiche until Meyer's books, and it was like it was mind blowing to read Meyer's books, because and then everyone else that I found discovered after that, because it was like, oh my God, it's not just, it's not just those 60 stories. I could write, if I was a writer, I could write Sherlock Holmes. And I knew I was a writer. but I didn't have any backing. I didn't have anything. So I became an artist for most of my life, visual artist, and made my living that way. But now, thank God, I've been given this wonderful chance to be what I've always wanted to be, and to write about heroes and heroines in true justice, which is for me the best of all. Okay, and that's where I'm going.
Fantastic. Thanks,
My
Gretchen.
beginning.
And on to our Antipodean author this morning. I hope you've got a really strong cup of coffee there, Steve, to wake you
Yeah,
up.
I've just finished it, sadly. Anyway, good morning from the other side of the world. Yes, it's a bright, sunny morning here in Canberra in Australia. We're just coming, it's spring here, it's coming into summer. It's just planted my veggie garden yesterday, so hopefully we'll have some tomatoes and stuff by summer. Yes, about me. So I live in Canberra in Australia. That's the capital for those people that are playing at home. I've been writing for decades. I started writing feature film scripts just as a bit of a hobby. I've always dreamed of trying to. I think I had a problem of not being able to get the words down on the page quick enough. So I went to something short form, which is script writing. Wrote about 16 scripts, won an international competition at one stage, mostly in horror. I'm actually mostly a horror writer. And after a while, I found myself going back to prose writing when I was told about an anthology a few years back, and managed to get a couple of short stories published in that, and it's been head down ever since. So currently I'm at about in the 90s. I've had over 90 short stories published and another 90 odd drabbles or 100 word stories. So 100 words, no more, no less stories published as well. And a few years back, I saw a call out from Derek Bellinger for a H.G. Wells Sherlock Holmes crossover. So intrigued, I thought I'd give it a try. And luckily, Derek picked up my story, and from there I've now onto my 22nd Sherlock Holmes pastiche with another 4 Solar Ponds pastiches as well. Most of them have been published, so I'm very happy about that. And early last year, I saw a call out from Steve Amek saying if anyone's got a few stories that they've got together so far, they might want to try and put them into a collection. So I said, well, if you don't ask, you don't get. And earlier this year, my collection of The Curious Cases of Sherlock Holmes was published, and I am over the moon. And David was the editor, so I am in awe of anything any of his feedback that comes back, and always happy to talk with him, and always happy to bring my stories into a more of a canonical sense and canonical vision, if you like. And I was also lucky this year that my first novella, a science fiction horror novella called After the Fall, was published. The second book will be published in December this year. So it's been a whirlwind year, and it's only getting better. So, and yeah, that's probably about it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Let's jump back to Conan Doyle and start with a very easy question, which is actually quite a difficult question, I think, really, which is favorite story within the canon. So let's jump back to David. So David, tell us what's your favorite in the canon, if you can name one.
My favorite in the canon is the Blue Carbuncle, and I think it kind of comes in second rate for a lot of people compared to, you know, the Red-Headed League, kind of the Baskerville Sign of the Four, but it's just to me, it's like the perfect Sherlock Holmes story. A lot of the appeal of those stories to me is the setting, not just the year, but also the season, and the fact that it takes place at Christmas. And I think I'm also kind of influenced by the fact that that's probably my favorite episode in the Jeremy Brett series, the way that they filmed that. And it's just works really well. I mean, there's a certain level of absurdity to it, you know, geese swallowing valuable jewels. And I also like the fact that at the end of it, you pretty much have Holmes and Watson playing judge and jury. And there's this kind of implicit or explicit acknowledgement that a lot of times the legal system, the judicial process is very prejudicial and detrimental to individuals in the lower class, that it is designed to be punitive towards them, whereas people in the upper class are going to walk free. And in the end of the story, Holmes and Watson, they let the criminal walk free. And so it's a good tale, it's a good adventure, but it's also thought-provoking. And I like pretty much every aspect of it, and the fact that it's all wrapped around the holidays and Christmas and snow. It's just, it's kind of a magical story for me.
Fantastic. And Wendy, what would you say
Yes.
is your favorite?
My favorite is Scandal. And I think it has so many elements. I've always been fascinated by Sherlock Holmes and his disguises. And in this one, he has two disguises. He's the drunken groom, and he's the iconoclastic priest. And I think, and things are employed like the plumber's smoke bomb and stuff like that. It's just a wonderful story. And Sherlock Holmes is the witness at Irene Adler's wedding. And the fact that she doesn't lose from a woman's point of view is the only one in the whole canon that really happens like that. And she is the woman, and I think that it's just a terrific story.
Fantastic. And Alexandra, with your focus on the theatre, what's your favorite?
It would have to be Hound of the Baskervilles. Now, I have to admit, it's a co-favorite with next to Valley of Fear. But what I love about Hound of the Baskervilles is, in a lot of ways, it was Doyle's triumph. He sort of took that hiatus, as we all know, and broke people's hearts around the world, not writing any more Sherlock Holmes stories. William Gillette came, he did the play, and it inspired Doyle with Hound of the Baskervilles. And I think it's the Mona Lisa of mystery novels. I mean, it's absolutely flawless. It's complex. It's the Holmes we know and we love, and the characters, the backgrounds, how he figures everything out. I mean, it's like a complex clock where everything just works so perfectly. But it's also personal for Doyle, being, returning. And when I was doing research for my book, The Dramatic Moment of Fate, I was surprised how much of the play actually influenced Doyle. And it was kind of nice. I guess he got to see Sherlock Holmes up close and personal in a way, because Gillette really channeled Holmes in an interesting way. So Hound of the Baskervilles is, to me, a lot about, as much about the author as it is about his greatest creation. So I always loved Hound. I just didn't realize how much more complex and nuanced the layers were until I actually started doing research about Holmes and the theater.
Yeah, fantastic. We were delighted a couple of weeks ago to be able to go to a dinner theatre adaptation of Hound of the Baskervilles in London with three of our authors, Tony Reynolds, Alistair Duncan and Orlando Pearson. And I was shocked it's the first time I've seen it on stage. It was 3 stages because it was a dinner theatre. How much dialogue Watson has. I mean, it's Holmes disappears for good chunks of the Hound, and playing it on stage, the Watson part is considerably meatier, it seems, than the Holmes part in Hound. And David, having written 88 pastiches now and reaching back to the canon on a very regular basis, what would you say is your go-to story?
If you ask me on different days, it's always going to be a different answer. So I was sitting here running through things in my head, trying to decide which one I liked. Today's answer, I guess, would be The Sign of the Four, for various reasons. It most of the time, the original Holmes novels kind of get knocked a little bit in comparison to the short stories. But this one, the story plays out very linearly. It's told very well. As Holmes goes through it, they meet some pretty bizarre characters like the Sholtos and Tonga. There's the trek across London as they're taking Toby to track the footprints that have walked through the creosote. It's a chance for Holmes to show up Scotland Yard, and Athelney Jones is another one of the curious kind of grotesque characters that they meet. Even though he's a Scotland Yard inspector, he's a little over the top. Wendy had mentioned Holmes in disguise, and he's also in disguise in this story, where he shows up as the laborer with the proper workhouse cough. There's the exciting boat chase at the end. And then there's a feature about it at the end where Jonathan Small tells the story about how he ended up, how his life played out and how he ended up where he's at now. It's a feature in a lot of the original Holmes stories, that many of them involved people bringing their problems from outside of England to England and causing a crime there, a situation that Holmes had to investigate. And in this case, it was Jonathan Small's adventures as a young man, where he committed murder to be part of a group that was trying to steal a treasure, and all that came back to England from the outside. So in general, it's just that's today's answer, but it might be something different tomorrow.
Fantastic. And on our earlier panel, Alistair Duncan had a very similar passion for The Sign of Four. He said it even had a bit of romance for Watson in it there, I think.
True.
I'd say it was a treasure, bit of romance, a linear plot. That's all you can ask for. Gretchen, you're a big fan of the Red-Headed League, I think.
Well, actually, I would rather speak about the Devil's Foot if no one else is going to talk about that. Sorry. I mean, I am a fan of the Red-Headed League, but but what I love about the Devil's Foot is that Watson takes the lead, even in some ways. Well, I'm not going to go there. In some ways, more than the Hound. He kind of has to take Holmes under his professional in his professional capacity. He has to take care of Holmes, who has once again worked himself to death. And I love that. I love seeing it. I mean, it's a little of that at the beginning, but then the scene, and then there's this amazing scene later on where Holmes runs upstairs, runs downstairs, jumps through the window, lies down on the, I mean, he does everything that he's done in almost every other times that he's searching for clues. In this one scene. And Jeremy Brett, of course, did not attempt it because it would have killed him. But the thing about this, and that Granada left out, that I'm pissed every time I watch the film. I yell at them. You know, they left out Watson's greatest moment, which is where the two of them are breathing in the fumes of this poison, of the Devil's Foot poison, and both of them are being destroyed. The minds are being destroyed. But Watson, you know, opens his doctor's eyes and sees Holmes in dying, like the other people who died breathing in these fumes. And he gets up, puts his arms around him, and takes him outside, and where they both can now breathe normal air and survive. And that moment it's so Watson, and it's so powerful. And I wish that, and I love that Doyle put that in there. And you can tell I'm a pro Watson person. I
Yeah,
love them both.
we had a yeah, we had a very pro Watson person on the previous panel. In fact, going as far as saying that Watson was their favorite character over and above Holmes, which may be a
How
bit
can-
controversial. How can
I
you
mean,
do that? How can you do that?
We are
Um,
emulating him.
So, Stephen, what's left in terms of the canon? What can you say?
I think, strangely enough, the story that I think I like the most, probably because I've read it the most, is The Engineer's Thumb. And it's only because I wrote a sequel story to it called The Adventure in Nancy. And then I've recently written the prequel to it called The Man from Moscow, which is about Colonel Alexander Stark. And so I've basically created a triptych of stories around Conan Doyle's original story. And I like it because it's Stark is such a nasty, psychotic type of character. And in the end, it doesn't really resolve itself. So it leaves itself very open for that interpretation to bleed onto another story at the end of it. And then it's left itself intriguing enough to what happened beforehand to set up the events in England itself. Of what I can remember, of what I've seen, is that Holmes does get somewhere with the story, but it's never really resolved because the house burns down, the culprits have all disappeared, and you're sort of just left there with this guy without a thumb, trying to figure out what eventually happened and where to go from there. So yeah, more from the fact that I think I've read it more than anything, and I think it's just a very intriguing little story. But yeah.
Can I just add, this is the Man from Moscow that Steve was talking about that I'm just editing now. So it'll be in an upcoming book. So
I have to admit that one of my favorite things that makes me smile when I open up my Facebook feed is when I see the signature photograph of David Markham's, which has the title of the pastiche that he's editing, his deerstalker, and his coffee and whatever cookie or donut or something you're eating while you're editing. It's great because I think it shows that anybody can write a Sherlock Holmes pastiche and get it in and get it submitted. Let's jump away from the canon now and go to sort of modern adaptations. We've got a number of people here on the panel that have written about the adaptations. And if we jump back to David to start with, what are your thoughts around I would say the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of the adaptations? What's contributed to the furtherment of the canon, and is there a line that people have stepped over the years?
Well, it's such a iconic character. You know, I would argue probably the greatest fictional character ever created, that the demand to see Holmes in other contexts is pretty considerable. And so over the years, yeah, there's been all manner and type of films, TV shows, plays. I was really happy to be able to see the William Gillette version. He made a film of his play in 1916. It disappeared for like 90 years. It was presumed to be lost, and then a complete version of it was found. And you can now watch William Gillette's 1916. Basically, it's a filmed version of his play, and it gives you a good idea of this is why people loved him so much. He has this incredible presence. And yeah, it's a silent movie, and yeah, it's not, you know, Technicolor, and a lot of people find that off-putting, but it's I really enjoyed seeing that. I think the Bread series is great. The first 2 seasons of the BBC's Sherlock are just stunningly inventive and brilliant. After that, it really went off the rails. As one of the creators said, we can do anything we want, which is, I mean, that level of hubris is never going to end well. And yeah, it really sadly kind of crashed and burned by the time season 4 came along. But yeah, the bad versions of Sherlock Holmes are legendarily bad. And the recent version that had Will Ferrell in it, that's near the top. As is the gentleman who played Max Headroom, many years ago, made 3 Sherlock Holmes movies in Canada, in Old Montreal. They look great. The production values are great, but Matt Frewer plays Holmes as a wild and crazy Holmes, and it's just really off-putting. And I would say, however, all things told, the worst Sherlock Holmes ever is The Hound of the Baskervilles with Dudley Moore. And who plays Holmes in that?
Peter Cook.
Yeah, Peter Cook. I mean, that's just a debacle. It's like, we're going to do this, and then we don't know what we're going to do. Let's just do our old comedy skits and shoehorn them into a Sherlock Holmes movie. And the film literally ends with Watson getting pelted with vegetables and rotten fruit. So I think they knew just how bad it was. So yeah, I find something to like in almost any of them. I like, even a lot of people don't like the ones with John Cleese, where he plays Sherlock Holmes, and The End of Civilization as We Know It. But I think he's got the greatest comic Holmes of all time. And I actually met John Cleese, and I talked to him about that, and he said, well, Arthur Lowe, the guy who played Holmes, was narcoleptic and fell asleep regularly on the set, but they're really charming. So for me, they run the gamut from the early Brett series is off the charts amazing. The Benedict Cumberbatch series, especially A Scandal in Belgrave, I think it's called Belgravia. That's just terrific, just amazing. And then, you got to take the good with the bad. And some of it is really, really, really bad.
And as your view, Alexandra, is with a focus on the stage, what stage adaptations have you seen that really inspired you?
Well, there's the original Gillette version, of course, which is sort of the gold standard. There's been different permutations of The Hound of the Baskervilles, The Sign of the Four, and I tend to like them more serious. But you've had more comedic Holmes. You've had Sherlock Holmes as musicals, and more than one, which I kind of found interesting. But to me, some of the ones that done well, and some of them haven't done well. I don't know if many people are aware, but David Arquette played Sherlock Holmes in one permutation, and what shocked me was that he said he basically didn't know anything about Sherlock Holmes. I didn't know that was physically possible, that somebody not know about Sherlock Holmes, and his performance was not well received because he didn't seem to understand. To me, I think Hound of the Baskervilles just lends itself to it. It's playing, The Raven's Curse now is playing at the Shaw Festival. That's another Sherlock Holmes one, but I think there's so many different kinds of, there's more than one Holmes around. I think in theater, you can really see the differences in the type of portrayals of Holmes. And what I find interesting is there's so much more Irene Adler in the theater. I think it gives more freedom for playwrights to explore. When I was doing research for it, one of the playwrights said, I don't think you can be an author where sooner or later you cross paths with him. And I think Sherlock Holmes is just, you can have him so many different ways, and yet somebody who can find his way in the dark and look at mundane things and see things that are extraordinary. I think that's why he is endured for well over a century. And I think, 100 years from now, we're still going to be talking about him. I think he's going to be one of those universally relevant characters that we can expect to see.
Fantastic. And Wendy, your book is from the perspective of Mrs Hudson. What portrayals of Mrs Hudson do you think have resonated with you?
Well, I would have to say that the most recent Mrs. Hudson in the Benedict Cumberbatch one was because my theory is that Mrs. Hudson was quite a bit younger than she's been portrayed. And she came into ownership of 221B through the death of her husband, because in 1870, the only way a woman, from the 1870 law, the only way a woman could own property was if her husband died. Otherwise, everything belonged to him and went to his family. So I think that Mrs. Hudson, who is, I'm not your housekeeper, I'm your landlady, was very effective. And I just want to say that my feeling about Sherlock Holmes is that it's a generational type of thing, where there's the William Gillette that started it off, and 83 years ago, Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce, then the Jeremy Brett, and now after the Jeremy Brett, we've got the Robert Downey Jr.'s and the Johnny Lee Millers and things like that. So I was lucky to grow up in a Sherlockian home, and where my dad took me to Gillette's Castle about 3 times before I was 6 years old.
Wow.
And it turns out that my view of Mrs. Hudson, although it differs from Mr. Starrett's, because of her stately step, most women did deportment in those days, the middle class and the upper middle class women. And she would have a stately step on the stairs, even if she was a younger woman. So I think crawling around on her knees and shifting busts of Sherlock Holmes and putting up with his nonsense and the irregulars and things like that, I would classify her as a younger woman.
Fantastic. And Steve, as the Australian representative here, is there a have there been Australian adaptations of Sherlock Holmes?
Well, that's a good question. Not that I know of. But I think a lot of times the detective side of Holmes flows on into other areas, and a lot of sort of more modern stories are told with using the Sherlock Holmes deductive techniques and things like that to actually bring them into the more modern world. But as a character, I don't think there's been really a lot here. It would be an interesting to put a sort of ochre halo around a Sherlock Holmes adaptation, I suppose. So maybe something I could look at myself in a future endeavor.
Yeah, maybe you should pioneer that. Whenever I get asked the question, what's your favorite adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, I'll often answer House, with the wonderful
Laurie.
Hugh Laurie. I was going to say Jeeves and Wooster there for a second. I just blanked on Hugh Laurie, but yeah, I think father of all modern home fiction, crime fiction, has given so many adaptations, and I know that David, when we got Lee Child to participate in the MX Book of New Sherlock Holmes stories, he talked about how the Jack Reacher character was inspired by Holmes with his deductive reasoning, and it brings into massive movies like starring Tom Cruise, all traced back to Sherlock Holmes. Now, we wouldn't have the MX Book of New Sherlock Holmes stories if it wasn't for your dream about these terrible modern adaptations. But is there a adaptation that sits well with you?
I like the classic stuff that hews as close as it can to the actual canon. So the early Basil Rathbone movies, if you don't look too closely at Nigel Bruce. The Arthur Wantner films from just a little before the Basil Rathbone films, things like that. Let's see, Peter Cushing and Douglas Wilmer's TV episodes from the 60s were really good. So that's the kind of thing I like. I started the MX books. I mentioned The Dream, but it was really just as kind of a pushback, because I had noticed in a lot of stories that I was reading that some of the more modern aspects were creeping into the stories. Like, even if the stories were set in the proper traditional time, Holmes was going to his mind palace and things like that, which, you know, was not correct. So I was very strict when the MX anthology started, that the stories absolutely had to be indistinguishable, essentially, from what would have been found in the Strand for the initial publications. And it turned out that although there's a lot of interest in the modern version of Holmes, there's also a lot of interest in that original traditional version, because a lot of authors wanted to write those, and a lot of people still want to read those. So it helps a lot, or it helps just to have stuck to our guns on that, I think, because that's kind of made people know where they can go to find that kind of Holmes story.
And if I look over your left shoulder, Gretchen, I can probably guess which adaptation might be your favorite.
Yes, yes. Yes. Granada, Jeremy Brett, but I also love oh God, forget it. Having problems with names right now for some reason. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the what is happening with women writers, women who are writing Sherlock Holmes now and have been writing Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I mentioned that Nicholas Meyer was mind-blowing for me, but the next writer that was mind-blowing for me was Laurie R. King. Her books brought me to a whole nother level. And not that I agree very much with her depiction of Holmes, but just that she did it. And Wendy's Mrs. Hudson, Jerry's wonderful trilogy that she's writing another book for right now, Jerry Shear. And every single one of my books involve the women of the times, the history of the women of the times, which Arthur Conan Doyle doesn't see. He's blind to, totally blind. And Holmes is totally blind to it, but I think is very important, and that's why I write about it. And my present book, which is going to come out in December, The Keys of Death, my image of Mrs. Hudson takes off on Wendy's wonderful characterization. And she's also a younger Mrs. Hudson, much younger. And so anyway, I think that's a whole nother area, and I love that I'm part of it.
Fantastic. Maybe we've just touched past the hour, but we can run over just a little bit, just have some final comments if we run around the table. And maybe we start with David. You've written a couple of volumes about the enduring nature of the Holmes character. What would you say is the key reasons why Holmes is as engaging now as it was 130 years ago?
Well, 130 years ago, Sherlock Holmes was pretty revolutionary. I mean, yeah, Edgar Allan Poe had written about a detective prior to that, but the Holmes stories, the number of them, the response to them, it was an entirely different kind of hero. Up until that point, heroes basically were really good at slaughtering large numbers of human beings in real life and in fiction. That's what made Achilles great. That's what made Genghis Khan great. or Alexandra the Great or Napoleon Bonaparte, really good at slaughtering large numbers of human beings. And Sherlock Holmes, by contrast, he's somebody that wants to understand the world, to read the world, and to improve the world. And he's kind of the epitome of what makes human beings. That is that we are pattern recognition animals. That's why we excel in our environment. You know, what the sky looks like, what the stars are doing. We can read patterns and adjust our behavior accordingly. That's where Sherlock Holmes is paramount. And, you know, increasingly today, you know, when you are surrounded constantly by misinformation, by people who are working really hard and make a lot of money by spreading misinformation, the notion of truth, the notion of facts, the notion of attempting to be objective and fair, that resonates with a lot of people because they recognize that they are surrounded by so much, you know, hostile misinformation and nonsense that it's comforting to know that even if it's a fictional character or the people that admire that fictional character, there's people that they want to know what's true and they want goodness and they want to believe in the best of humanity. And that's what Sherlock Holmes represents. And like I said, for me, Sherlock Holmes is the single greatest fictional character ever created. You know, maybe with Santa Claus, a close second. So that's I think it's the stories are inspiring because they touch on what makes humanity great. Our efforts to understand the world and to help each other. And that's what I admire most about the stories and the character.
Fantastic. And the other David, why do you think Holmes is so strong still?
It's hard to top what David just said. I think that as people go through life, they are looking for a hero. And here's a guy who's clear cut. Too often today, I think that Holmes, there are attempts to water him down, to make him a little bit more broken so people can identify with him. And that's why I think more people keep going back to the originals, because in those you've got a guy who fights for what he believes in. He's smarter. He's the smartest guy in the room. And just the stories in general are engaging, and they pull you from one to the next one. You want to know more. So.
And Gretchen?
I want to kind of jump off on that. Take off on what both David said. And I lost it. I'm looking at my cheat sheet. Damn it. Oh, okay. It's because they are human heroes with human abilities, is what I think is what's important. That genius is a human ability. Friendship is a human ability. Love is a human ability. And that's never going to go away. That's always going to pull people in and excite people. And the thing about Sherlock that really ticks me off is where they labeled him. They labeled Sherlock Holmes as some kind of illness. Well, the truth is they didn't do their research. If they looked up genius, it takes if they just Googled genius, they'd find out that, it's not an illness. It's not an illness. It's a reality, and it's a very interesting reality.
And Alexandra, the enduring nature of Holmes for this, what makes him eminently playable on the stage, on and on?
Well, he's innate, he understands chaos and plurality. Very few characters have that idea where you can go and you can look at somebody. It doesn't matter where their socioeconomic background is. He could look at people and see right through them. I mean, he was probably what we would consider a very good psychologist. He was a very good reader of people. He was raw. He was, he could box. He could go into, drug dens, and he could go to castles, and, he absolutely could. He was flexible and he could navigate. And I think a lot of people wish they could do that. They could go in and anywhere. It could be a crowd, of high rollers, or you could go in with, the most dispossessed people, and he could connect to people and just see their reality and find the truth from that. And it's, I think, a lot of Sherlock Holmes is just our wish fulfillment. People feel awkward around other people. They don't know, they're too me focused. And he was a very you focused, emotional kind of detective. And I think a lot of that gets lost in the translation, being able to connect to other people and understand them. And that's what I think the enduring nature of Sherlock Holmes is, that he could understand people just by looking at them. And I think a lot of people wish they could understand people that easily, but he was an observer. And I like the fact that he was an observer. And I think my attraction to that character is that he didn't have to be the center of attention. He could totally disappear in the woodwork and know more than anybody else who was trying to get attention on themselves. I think that's his, for shy, introverted people, he's their hero.
Fantastic. And Wendy, you focus very much on Mrs. Hudson. How do you feel that the interplay between her and the two key characters, Holmes and Watson, how has that endured?
Well, she's loved them in all the iterations of Mrs. Hudson. She's always loved Holmes and Watson, not in a romantic way, but in a almost elder sister way. But I did want to say that one of the reasons why I think the Holmes character endures and the Watson character, they're very compelling, and to the degree that I have been astonished by the number of people who ask me whether they really lived. And I've had arguments actually that with one woman who said that no, he really lived, and I said no, he didn't. He lived but will never die. It's just, you see it across all socioeconomic backgrounds and things like that, that Sherlock has this compelling personality, this joy in the relationship with Watson. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention my co-author, who has taught me, John G. Guillen, who has taught me so much about the relationship between Watson and Holmes and the friendship that they had. That was so important. So I think that Mrs. Hudson and the three principals, she was in 11 of the stories, I believe, and she was devoted to them, and they were devoted to her as well.
Fantastic. And I think we'll leave the final word to our Antipodean author, Stephen. As you're already in tomorrow, you're ahead of us. So why don't you finish off on your thoughts on Holmes and Watson, why they're so enduring?
I think just to underpin what everyone else has been saying, it's just that Holmes is that hero, is someone you can look up to. And the most important part is it's someone we could all be. Nothing that Holmes does is superhuman. It's a skill that he has learnt and is using. And it's much the same way that a lot of people are in the superhero world. People are drawn to Batman more than Superman because Superman has innate superhuman abilities, but Batman had to learn everything. Everything had to come from somewhere. It's a skill that he had to learn. And he relies on Alfred as much as Holmes relies on Watson, just for that extra level of emotional attachment, if you like. So that's probably where I see him come from. And just one last point, there has been an Australian Sherlock Holmes. Richard Roxburgh played Holmes in the 2003 production of Hound of the Baskervilles. So, and he's one of my favourite Australian actors.
Fantastic. So we finished on the night with the calming fact that there has been an Australian adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. Just remains for me to thank all of our panelists tonight. David McGregor, Alexandra Kitty, Wendy Heyman-Marsaw, Gretchen Altabef, David Markham and Stephen Herczeg. Thank you so much, guys, and look forward to talking to you all again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Steve.
Ciao.